Hi, everyone. Just as Sarah said, we're going to do basically just a Q&A today. And then we're going to have a guest presenter, Adrienne Lawyer from the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, to give a presentation. But for now, handing it off to Miranda.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So we didn't put together a slide presentation today, partly because we are in a bit of a holding pattern on new information about COVID stuff. On the vaccine front, we haven't heard from FDA about any changes. And on kind of everything else, really the question on the table is, what is the end of the public health order going to look like? Just to review, the New Mexico public health order around COVID is ending at the end of this month. So is the automatic kind of Medicaid extension. And then the national public health order, the federal public health order, is ending May 11th. So CDC and Health and Human Services are scrambling to kind of get the plan and the messaging out, but there really isn't much that they've let us know yet. So anyway, we'll be back at it in 2 weeks, hopefully with some more information. But happy to answer questions now, if there are any. It's kind of a COVID breather, maybe. And if there aren't any questions, I know you're in store for a great presentation today. And so if questions do come up that you didn't think about, you can put them in the chat, and maybe Liesl can email. If I'm going to stay for the beginning, I probably won't be able to stay for the whole time, but just let me know. So there's one question about what will the end of the national health order mean? And that is such a great question. So here is my current understanding. Sort of the national health order is more than one thing. There's like really 5 or 6 buckets that helped us get through. So buckets of funding and kind of proclamations that helped us get through COVID. So there are certain ones that aren't ending, and I think that affect our work. And one of them is that the FDA is going to continue those emergency use authorizations for vaccine and for the medications, which at one point we were sort of worried that when the public health order ended, we wouldn't be able to use those vaccines anymore, or Paxlovid, but all of that is going to continue. Similarly, for those vaccines and for the medication, there is a federal stockpile. So even though the public health order is going to end on May 11th, free vaccine and free medication are not going to end on May 11th. They will end when the federal government runs out of their current supply. They've already bought the medication, they've already bought the vaccine, and we'll keep giving it to states until it runs out or expires. But what that date is a little bit unclear. It's somewhere in the fall, maybe, or if people really aren't getting vaccinated, it might be longer. So somewhere between the fall and the beginning of 2024 is what we've heard as kind of predicted dates. So the end of the public health order is going to affect 2 things. The big one, I think, is that Medicaid extension ended. They, as long as the public health order was in place, they told states, you can't kick people off of Medicaid. But now, and I don't, there's probably a nicer way to say it, but they weren't making people renew for Medicaid. But now people will need to renew, and that's a really big thing. And there will be some people that have had Medicaid through the through COVID and now won't qualify for Medicaid. And then the second thing is a lot of federal funding is going to end. So the FEMA funding, that kind of emergency Stafford funding, has largely ended, but definitely going to end at the end of the on May 11th. And then other kind of federal pots of money that we've been able to provide free testing and free services. So that's it in a nutshell. I think the other big one people were wondering about telehealth services, and it looks like there have been a lot of extensions on kind of the flexibilities around telehealth. So there won't be big changes there in what providers, being able to do telehealth. And the stockpile for antiviral drugs, someone asked, and the prediction we've heard is end of the year, that there should be enough to make it through the end of the year. Great. Are there any other? All right. Well, great. Thanks so much. We'll see you back in, I'll see you back in 2 weeks, and I'll hand it back to Liesl.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miranda. And we hope to have more specific information for you guys in a couple weeks. We're continuing to hunt down all this information. So yeah, stay tuned about all this stuff. And now we're going to hand it over to our guest speaker, who we're so excited about, Adrian.
All right, cool. Is it too rudimentary a question? I know I'm not the person who should be asking questions, but well, how is the infection rate and mortality rate in New Mexico right now? Or do we even know? How does it compare to the way it's been? Is it even possible?
Also a good question. Nothing is too rudimentary for this call. And usually every week we do present where we are in New Mexico. And but because we didn't have anything else, we skipped that part too. But yeah, the New Mexico remains, every county is in the green on that community transmission map. So cases are definitely down. As we kind of mentioned many times, some of the cases, it's hard to interpret just because home tests don't make the case count. And we know that, more and more people are using home tests, partly because it's hard to find a place that's still testing. But the other good news is hospitalizations are down, and deaths nationally are down in New Mexico as well. We're following those same trends. So things really are looking good. Again, our trend, deaths under 5,000 a week US wide, which I mean is still a lot of deaths, but still, like, we've had sort of the longest period of time where we're underneath that mark. It's now been a number of months since the beginning of the pandemic. So it does, we have this XBB variant, the XBB 0.1.5, that was super aggressive at taking over, but really isn't landing people in the hospital more. And I think some of that is because lots of immunity from either having had the disease or from having been vaccinated, and then Paxlovid also helps. So.
Interesting.
More than you wanted to know. But...
No, it's actually, I was very curious. Then thanks for that website. I'm looking at that. That's a ton of info. It looks like it's down. It looks like it's down. Huh.
Yeah. No, it's sort of like hard to not knock wood after, but it's been kind of a fairly steady downward trend. And here so good news.
Yeah. Now I'm scared of people's RSV though too. So now
there's lots of new things to be scared, or not new old things, but the things we used to worry about, like, hey, welcome back.
I know the COVID's one thing, but I've been sick since Thanksgiving, it feels like, with something.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm Adrian Lawyer. I use he pronouns. I'm the Director of Education at the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. We're a nonprofit organization, and we're a statewide organization by design. I think sometimes in New Mexico, folks, think that all the resources are only here in Albuquerque or concentrated just for Albuquerque. But from the very beginning, we were never the Transgender Resource Center of Albuquerque. We were always the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico. And the things I'm going to show you, for the most part, are available to trans and non-binary people throughout the state as well as our families and loved ones. So TGRC was founded in 2007. We were really the definition of a grassroots organization. We had no pre-existing funding or resources. We were just people trying to help other people. But in that 15 years, we've grown to be a really sizable statewide organization that serves trans and non-binary folks through a really intentional combination of direct services, advocacy, and education. So when we say direct services in nonprofit orgs, we're really just talking about helping people. These are things that you do in nonprofits that are just trying to reach individuals within your target population. And pretty much all of these things are things that we can do for people wherever they are. They can contact us. They never have to come to Albuquerque to get help legally changing their name, obtaining, oh, and guess what? Well, I should wait. I'll wait till we get to that slide to tell you the good news that I have today. But we can help people legally change their name. We can help them obtain or update their identity documents. We have people come to us with unexpected financial challenges that they have when they need help as a sort of an emergency financial assistance. We are just about to hire a full-time staff therapist who will be doing counseling and therapy out of our drop-in center, but also for people around the state via telehealth. We do a lot of information and referrals for folks, including we have a provider directory on our website that is available 24 hours a day that you can search by keyword or location. You never have to talk to anybody on our staff even to look at that. We send out a lot of trans specific items for people, and that can be a whole lot of different things, but the main request I would say we get is for what's called a binder. And a binder is a compression undergarment that people wear to flatten and compress their chest underneath their clothes. And once you add in the shipping costs, a binder can be up to $50. And so for some of our folks, that feels really out of reach. It feels like something that they aren't able to do for themselves. But a binder can be the thing that helps people have enough confidence to leave the house and go to school or have a job. So we know that a binder is something that people need, and we can pay for that and ship it to whatever safe and secure location you can use to pick it up. We do non-medical case management, and we do statewide outreach and support for trans and non-binary people who are incarcerated. So that includes the state prison facilities, but also the county jail. We have 9 different peer support groups that meet all throughout the month. Each one of our groups meets once a month in person and once a month on Zoom. So we have people and families from Roswell and Mora connecting into our support groups now. So we really hope that you'll help refer people into these groups, even if they're not in Albuquerque. Our parents support group is a group for family members, not just parents, but any family members who need support around having a trans or non-binary person in their family, or who are willing to lend support to others about that. So that's an amazing group, one of our sweetest and very non-judgmental groups for people who are struggling, you know, with that information that somebody that they know and love is trans or non-binary. It's a great place to ask questions and help to put your fears to rest with other families that also have a trans person in them. We have a play group for little trans and non-binary children and their families. And we have a youth group for teens and adolescents, young adolescents who are trans or non-binary. We do have a drop-in center here in Albuquerque, but as I said, you don't have to ever come to the drop-in center to get help from us. You can request help over the phone or over the internet. We have all kinds of forms on our website for people to get in touch with us and ask for help if they need it. But here in town, right near Central and San Mateo, we have our only physical location currently, and we call it our drop-in center. We're open 3 days a week. And the drop-in center is for anybody who wants to come there. It's definitely available as a resource for any trans or non-binary person. We do have people who just come by to get help with a bill that they weren't expecting, or people who come by to get a name change paperwork packet, right? So folks, all different kinds of folks come to the drop-in center for different reasons. But the center itself was built and designed around the needs of trans and non-binary folks who are experiencing homelessness. So at the drop-in center, we have a shower for people. We have laundry facilities. We are a lot of people's permanent mailing address. We have permanent storage for people's things. We have donated clothing and household items that we can give out to people. We have computer access, rapid HIV testing. We're a very large volume harm reduction site, and our harm reduction services are available to anyone, even if they're not transgender. We have community partners, amazing partners like Healthcare for the Homeless and New Mexico Legal Aid, who bring their services into our drop-in center to reach people who they otherwise might miss out on, and provide services that we don't want to try to provide it as an organization. Like, for instance, we're not trying to be a medical clinic, because that's a whole other ball of wax, you know? So we have Healthcare for the Homeless who bring medical providers in to provide services directly to our folks. We have a massage therapist who comes in as a volunteer. This Thursday, not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow, we're having a name change clinic staffed by some law students from UNM Law School. They're going to help people update their identity documents and change their names next Thursday morning, and that information is on our Facebook page. We also distribute a whole lot of food. So we give out about 25 prepared meals every shift that we're open. And we give out a whole bunch of non-perishable foods for the days that we're not there. So we're always trying to make sure that people can have something to eat. And we know that for some of our folks who come over to the center, the only way that they do have something to eat is from coming to the center. So food access is a really big thing with us. Okay, the second sort of pillar of our work at TGRC is what we call advocacy. Yeah, every day that we're open, we have about 25 or 30 of the prepared meals that we purchase from a contractor that we hand out to people. We almost never have any left over. And then we give out a bunch of like meals and prepared foods. We give out these big bags we call bunny bags for the longtime chair of our board, Bunny Cruz. And they often have things like little tuna salad that you mix up with crackers and, you know, like shelf stable puddings and granola bars and all kinds of things for people to try to subsist on for the days that we're not there to feed them that kind of hot meal that we have. Thank you. Any questions? A good question with me, by the way. I really and truly mean that. If you have a question that you're worried is rude or inappropriate or something, it really isn't, and it's okay. And you should ask me if you want to ask me, and don't be embarrassed. You can also private message me. If you feel somehow embarrassed about your question, you can just send it to me individually and I will answer it without calling your name or anything. Okay. So really, this is our safer space that we have today to be educated about this and to learn together. And so don't be embarrassed about asking me a question. If you have a question, somebody else in here has that question. And so be brave and ask it so we can all get an answer to it. So advocacy in nonprofits means, it can mean advocating for people. Like y'all do that a lot, actually. Y'all are advocates for folks a lot, I know. And we do that where we'll just help somebody who feels insecure about their voice at a meeting or at school or at work, a medical appointment. We sometimes have accompanied people too, because they were just so scared to do that by themselves. And so we advocate for people, but I think of that as more of a direct service. I know, Sam, we really just let our folks tell us what they needed, and it's amazing that if you don't have a mailing address, there's so many things you can't access, how can you access SNAP benefits if you don't have a mailing address? And our folks often really and truly did not have a place they could receive mail. So that was real. We were like, wow, that's a need that people wouldn't even think of, but it was such an important thing. So advocacy in nonprofits can mean advocating for folks, but what we mean when we say advocacy like that is usually policy work and legislative work. And we do all of that. So in terms of policy, there's a bunch of groups that we've worked with for many, many years. Albuquerque Public Schools is a great example. We've worked with them throughout my whole career. And at first we were just nudging them to have good, strong trans student policy. They didn't even have it at first. We worked with them for many years to get them warmed up and ready to do that. And then when they got ready, they asked us to help create the policy with them. Then we trained a lot of the schools on the policy. And then we've worked with them to stay on the committee that reviews and revises the policy as we go forward to keep it up to date. So that's a really great example of an organization in town that we've never not been in partnership with, trying to help the trans folks within APS. But we also are very happy to just drop in for any little consultation. It doesn't have to be a years-long thing. Sometimes people ask us to check out their intake forms or their website or their employee benefits or employee handbook, or even physical space. When people work in a place where people have to come in to get services, it can be great to just check out the bathrooms in that place and see if it's a safe place for people to use the bathroom and how they're going to feel when they come in. Because for trans folks, we can see things that you might not even notice because it might not affect you in the same way. So we're able to come in and just do consultation on policy or accessibility or whatever you want to call it. And then we work to help change the laws here in New Mexico. So in 2019, we updated the law that governs how you change the gender on your New Mexico birth certificate. So prior to 2019, part of our law was that you had to have surgery on your body in order to change the gender on your own birth certificate. And that is definitely what we would now call worst practices. So now we changed the law so that it's based on a simple notarized form that people fill out and send to Vital Records and get their birth certificate reissued with the correct gender on it. And that law was exciting because it also saw the addition of a third gender marker here in New Mexico for the first time. And this wasn't the first time we'd seen this. We were about the 14th state to do it, I think, in 2019. But we added the X as a gender marker to birth certificates. So now in New Mexico, if you're amending your birth certificate, you can choose M, F, or X, as I put into the chat, as the gender on your birth certificate. And we were then able to go to our friends at the MVD and get them to update driver's licenses to mirror this. So on your Real ID New Mexico driver's license, you can now choose M, F, or X as your gender. And at the beginning of 2022, the US government added the X to the passport document. So if y'all haven't seen M, F, and X as gender choices yet, you're really going to start to see it. I think we're hitting a tipping point here in the Western world, at least, for seeing more of this 3 gender option on even some of our most fundamental legal forms and identity documents. So pretty exciting. And we've been doing it here since 2019. So that was really cool. And here's the amazing news I wanted to tell you earlier. We've been working with our friends, really our friends at Equality New Mexico have been leading the charge this year to change the law that governs how you change your name here in New Mexico, because we were one of 35 or so states that still had what's called a publication requirement. And that means if you want to change your name legally in district court, you have to, by law, run an ad in the newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks that lists your legal old name, your legal new name, and the date of your hearing in the newspaper for 2 weeks. It's a really old law that was meant to protect creditors, actually, before we had things like social security numbers. So people would actually watch those ads and show up at people's hearings if somebody was just trying to change their name to avoid paying a debt, right? How funny is that to think about? Because you can't do that now, you know? I changed my name in 2005, which is a very long time ago in the trans world, but my credit card still knew who I was, you know? I had the same social security number. So we don't need that requirement anymore. And our bill passed the Senate last night and is on its way to the governor's desk. It went through all of its committees. It went through both chambers, and now it has passed the legislature and it's headed to Governor Lujan Grisham's desk for a signature. Super exciting. Yes, thank you. Why do we have X? That's such a good question. I'm sorry I didn't think to say it myself. M and F are the gender markers that most of us grew up with, right? Growing up, that's the only ones I ever saw. On forms or IDs, you could choose between M and F. So we pretty much know what those mean, male and female. But X is the alternate marker. It's meant to acknowledge that not every single person falls into the category of M or the category of F. So some intersex people actually, and we're going to talk about them very briefly today. So if you don't know what intersex means, just stay with me, okay? Some intersex folks would prefer to have X on like their birth certificate, while other intersex people identify as male or female. And many non-binary people would rather have X on their identity documents over having to choose between M and F, which neither one of those do they feel like. So X doesn't tell us the whole scope of all of the different genders that are out there, but it does just say we need an additional category beyond M and F for the folks who just don't fit into either one of those categories. Here's the most interesting thing though to me, Jen. Binary people like me or like cis folks can also choose to get X on their driver's license, because the other cool utility that it serves is to kind of stand in for none of your business, you know, like I don't really want this on here is what X can also mean. So it's kind of fascinating to me to think about how, you know, what if a lot of us start to use X just to be like, what is the point? You know, what is the point of that kind of thing? Then we can actually start to have that conversation with these entities. Like, why do we need to keep these demographic things on here? What purpose do they actually serve? And is there a real reason for it? You know, so anybody can have an X, but it was added specifically for non-binary people and also intersex folks sometimes. So the last thing that we do is this. We never stop doing these trainings. I do between 5 and 9 of these trainings a week. And this is actually a kind of an intro training, what we're doing today. When I don't have a full 2-hour time slot, I do this where I tell you a lot about the center and a little bit about the definitions that we would cover in what we now call transgender cultural fluency. We used to call it transgender 101. I'm sorry, I haven't updated my slide. But now we call that training transcultural fluency training. And it's a 2-hour time slot. And we talk about all the stuff we're going to talk about in a minute here, but much, 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 much more, right? So if you want to be part of a transcultural fluency training, I want to bring it to you. We also have what we call transgender 201. You can take that one after you take transcultural fluency. And we have a 1-hour workshop now that's just on pronouns and gender neutral language in English. So it's a workshop to think about the gender that comes into our everyday language and how we can work to use more gender-free language in English, because that's so much more inclusive for non-binary people. So it's really important that we start thinking about where gender shows up in our speech every day, and if and how we can sort of reduce that, right? And be more inclusive in our language that way. In Spanish, it's a whole other question, right? The Spanish language is so very gendered at its core, right? Every word has a gender to it. But in the Spanish speaking world, there's so much interesting discussion and dialogue going on about how to neutralize gender in language. And, you know, there's a whole lot of very interesting debate and discussion going on. No, our trainings are sliding scale from 0 to 400. So if a group can't afford to pay, we definitely don't charge. We want to train anybody who wants to be trained, but we charge 400 for a training typically. So if people can afford that, that's what we charge. And if not, we can go all the way down to 0 or anything in between, actually. So any kind of donation or honorarium helps us to defray the cost within the program, but we can go all the way down to 0, and we happily do that for groups that can't pay. I even train family groups sometimes, y'all, like aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas who have like a young person come out in their family, right? And they just want to get together at somebody's house and let me do this training for them. So I train correctional officers, I train medical providers, I train casual family groups. I trained all of the administrators at Bernalillo Public Schools this morning. That was awesome. So it's, you know, anybody who will let us come, we want to do it. We absolutely want to do it. No, if you want the training, you should just get in touch with me. So hold on, I'm sorry, now you have to watch me do this. This is not behind the scenes when you're sharing your whole desktop. But here is my contact info. This is my email signature block. So that has my cell phone number and my email address. And then here's a resource guide that we give out with that training. We usually like to reserve it for giving it out with the transcultural fluency, but it has so much cool stuff in it. I'm going to give you all that in the chat as well. Okay, let me see if you said something else. Oh, thank you, Maureen. Yeah, please hit me up, okay? Same thing, if you have a question that doesn't get asked or answered today, email me, text me, or call me. And then you, if you have a training group, you should email me, text me, or call me. And if you need help or someone you know needs help, please email me, text me, or call me. Awesome, you see it now. Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, we do lots of different trainings. We're coming up with new curricula all the time. We're excited to train anybody who wants the training. Absolutely, just hit me up if you want this. Okay, so here comes some basic terms, right? This is sort of the heart of the training, right? This is the meat of our training, essentially. And no matter who we're training, even with kids, we try to cover these 4 things, because most of us have been brought up to think about these 4 things in a very specific way in our childhoods, right? Culturally, we've been brought up to think about these 4 things as really interrelated, even causing one another sometimes, right? And in our training, it's really important that we start to break these 4 things apart. They're actually 4 separate things that we all have, but they're often not, quote unquote, aligned. When I was a kid, I was brought up to think of these things as always being in sort of like alignment for people, but they really aren't. These are just 4 attributes that we have. They may or may not line up. Okay. So we're going to talk about each one of these things. And in the 2-hour training, we can get so much deeper in the way that we're going to be able to talk about it. But your sex is your body. When we say sex, we're talking about human physiology. Your designated sex, that's what we call the genitals you were born with and which category that got you placed in at birth. That's your designated sex, right? Your biological sex is your genitals plus your chromosomes, hormones, gonads, and gametes. Your gonads are your internal reproductive organs. With humans, we typically think of testes and ovaries. And your gametes are your sex cells. So with humans, we typically think of sperm and eggs when we talk about gametes. And all of that is your physical body. Your gender is just what you know yourself to be on the inside. Every single one of the 88 people in this room has a deeply felt internal knowledge of being a man, a woman, or a non-binary person. Every single one of us in here knows which one of those we are. Even if you don't want to tell somebody, you know which one you are. And that is what we call your gender. Someday we're going to have really great scientific info about gender, but right now we're not at that place in history yet. But just because we don't have the information yet doesn't make it not true, right? There's so many medical and scientific things that we didn't understand until we did. So gender is a very real thing about human beings, but we don't have great medical info about it yet. We will, but for now, all we can do is take it at face value. And you can't see somebody's gender, you can't prove it, and you can't disprove it. So we would say there's not a great reason usually to argue with somebody about their gender. If they tell you what their gender is, that's it. They're the ones who know. So once somebody tells us, we just have to kind of take it at face value. Your gender expression is all the stuff we can see. Your gender can't be seen. It lives inside of you. But your gender expression is the clothing, hairstyle, jewelry, makeup, facial hair, speech, gait, gestures, mannerisms, even your name, whether you like it or not. Your name often causes people to guess about your gender, right? Especially in Zoom, a lot of folks in this room don't have their faces on the screen, but you do have your names on the screen. And so your names are giving people in the room an idea about what gender you are, because we use gender expression to guess people's gender. And one of the things that I'm trying to tell y'all today is that we actually can't do that. The way people look on the outside doesn't always match the way they look on the inside, right? And then your orientation is really just a description of who you're attracted to, and it has nothing to do with those other three things. So these four things don't have to line up for somebody. Let's talk a little bit more about them. And actually, let's talk about this for a second. This is sort of how we visualize those four things. So let me show you where my dots go on here, okay? My designated sex at birth was female. That's what makes me transgender. So my dot on that inner circle goes all the way over here on the left. But I have known that I was a boy since I was 3 years old. So I have always known that my gender is man. So in that second circle, my dot goes all the way over here on the right. It's almost the opposite, really, right? And then gender expression is how we look. So for me, I put my gender expression usually right around here. You know, there are a lot of things about me that are stereotypically masculine, but there are other things about me that really aren't. So I just put it, you know, kind of right in here. Now I want you to think about where your dots go in these three circles right now. What was the sex listed on your original birth certificate? You know, where do you fall in this circle? What do you know yourself to be? That's your gender. And how do you think you look in terms of the culture that you're from and that you live in? Are you stereotypically feminine? Are you stereotypically masculine? Are you neither? Do you change from day to day how you dress and present yourself? I mean, all of us do that a little bit, right? Sometimes I wear a little tie, you know, but most days I don't. So all of us change the way we present a little bit, you know, but in general, where do you think you fall on this circle? And then look how your orientation doesn't even touch your gender. They have nothing to do with each other at all. And so for me, my orientation is over here. It's not a dot. It's kind of like filling in this whole side of the circle. I'm only attracted to people who appear female. And I don't mean skirts and high heels. I mean like what we sell as women's clothes, you know, women's sweatpants, sneakers, jeans, t-shirts. We know it without even thinking about it. We process it instantly, right? And for me, I don't understand it. I'm just telling you, right? I'm only attracted to folks who fall on this side of the spectrum in terms of their outward appearance. Because that's attraction, right? We can't be attracted to somebody's designated sex, because how would we even know what that was? And I don't think we can be attracted to somebody's internal gender, because if you see somebody across the room, you don't know what that is either, you know, you just don't know. If a trans person hasn't come out or started transitioning, people have been attracted to them, mistaking them for the gender that they really weren't, you know? So we don't really know these internal things, but we know what somebody looks like, and that's usually how we're attracted. I know that people who are blind feel attraction. I know that. But for most of us, it's a strong visual component. It's what we see across the room that we feel attracted to, right? So we use the word transgender right now to mean anybody who has a sex and gender that don't match up 100%. So this is meant to be a really broad, inclusive umbrella term. See how it doesn't mean opposite? And see how it doesn't mean medical. Not every trans or non-binary person experiences what we call gender dysphoria. So to have medical stuff is not part of the definition of being transgender. Right? There are many ways that a person can be trans. Not every trans person looks stereotypically masculine or feminine. We got to be clear that somebody's genitals don't always match their gender, and somebody's gender expression also does not always match their gender. Right? There are many people who dress or groom themselves in a way that is not meant to reflect their internal gender. And for me, the people who've really brought this home in my life are non-binary people. Because non-binary people don't feel like a man, and they also don't feel like a woman. That is what it means to be non-binary. Now, this is very new in dominant US culture. Right? This is something we have not known about until very recently. So the temptation here is to think that this is a new phenomenon. But non-binary people have always existed. Transgender people have always existed. The historical record is so clear and so strong about this. And there are words for trans and non-binary people in almost every language. So this is actually not a youth phenomenon. This is not a new phenomenon. Non-binary people have always lived and walked among us. It's just that we are only recently starting to know that and acknowledge it. But it is so important not to get mixed up and think that this is a young people thing, right? This is all, I know non-binary people of every possible age. And look how different it can mean to be non-binary. All of these things on the screen are different non-binary identities. So some non-binary folks feel that they have no gender at all. They call that agender, right? For some people, they feel like their gender shifts and changes over time, and they call that gender fluid, right? All of these are different ways that a person could be non-binary. So it's a whole lot of, we're not talking about one category. We're talking about any category that isn't man and isn't woman. Now, non-binary folks sometimes, but not always, use gender neutral pronouns. And the most common one that is finally catching on in English is the singular they. So using the word they to talk about only one person. And it turns out that that is not even grammatically incorrect, y'all. The use of the singular they in English dates back to the 1300s. And some really famous authors, including Shakespeare, used the singular they in their writing. But for those of us who had post-Victorian educations, I can't speak for everybody in here, but that's me, okay? If you were educated after the Victorian era, you were taught that the singular they is wrong. Usually a teacher red inked your paper for it, but it's actually not wrong. It was in style, then it was out of style. Now it's coming back in style. So it's okay to say you're uncomfortable or that you need practice, but don't say that you won't use somebody's pronouns because it's grammatically incorrect. That's not even true, okay? And it's also a terrible reason. Let me give you one more resource before I forget. This is an article that links to a scientific study that really does seem to indicate that using the appropriate names and pronouns, especially with trans adolescents, can reduce suicidal behavior by as much as 56%. I have never heard of a suicide prevention intervention that's that effective. And this should be the easiest one you're ever asked to do. It's calling someone what they ask you to call them, right? And we get used to they as we use it more. I promise you, it'll start to feel really natural to you. You already do it and you don't even know it. We say stuff like, oh my gosh, somebody forgot their phone, right? Because we don't know whose phone it is. So we use they for one person colloquially already. So when someone asks us to do it, we just got to practice up and do it. I know that study is amazing. Click on that link and read that article. It's really incredible, really incredible. Okay, so cisgender then is the word that we use to talk about people who are not transgender. And this, interestingly, is something that people are upset about right now. I don't know. I think people think that the word cisgender is like PC or something. I don't know. I don't really get it. But I'll tell you that the word cisgender's best analogy to me is the word right-handed. I don't think this word is any more PC than the word right-handed, you know, because we have to have a name for the dominant majority group. If we don't have a neutral name for the dominant group, then we do some really creepy linguistic stuff, you know? We substitute the word normal without even thinking about it. You know, I've had people say that to me over the years and they didn't even mean any harm. But you can't be trans or normal. What? No, it is normal to be trans. I believe it's a minority characteristic, in fact. So it has to be trans or cis rather than trans or normal. The other kind of messed up thing we do when there's not a word for the big group is use no word at all. A long time ago, I read about a study these folks did where they wrote up a little short story and they had people read the story, right? And if the race of the character was named on the page, then all of the readers accurately named the race of the character, right? So if it said something like, the Vietnamese person went to the grocery store, you know, then everybody who read it said, oh, the character was Vietnamese. But if it just said the person went to the store, then readers of every race reported that the character was white, right? And that's the danger of dominance linguistically. If we don't have a name for the dominant group and use it, we end up allowing those patterns to continue, right? Oh, you know, she, her, and she, her, hers are just stretching it out or not stretching it out. I actually just say he pronouns because I think y'all know what other ones go in the set, you know? So I say, I'm Adrian Lawyer, I use he pronouns. But you can say I use she, her, or I use she, her, hers. It's all just a way of naming that set of pronouns, right? Oh, and she, they, when people say I use she or they, they're really saying that. They mean you can call me she or you can call me they, and I'm comfortable with either one of those pronouns. Either one of those feels like a good fit for me. So if you know someone in your life who uses two sets, if you have someone in your colleague group or whatever that says I'm he or they, use they. What a good chance to practice, you know? Don't fall back on what's comfortable. Go ahead and use they for that person. In fact, I use they now as my default pronoun for anyone I don't know because it helps me to practice and it also helps my brain not assume about people based on their gender expression. When I refer to people, even in my mind, as they, it keeps me from going down the rabbit hole about she's a woman or he's a man because you don't know who's non-binary. You can't tell by looking at them, right? So that is actually why our pronouns are hanging out everywhere now, is mainly because of non-binary people, because non-binary people look exactly like me and exactly like you. So there is no way to know that someone is non-binary by looking at them. So offering our pronouns in our Zoom captions, email signatures, as part of our introductions is actually an acknowledgement that that's information we don't have about each other. And if your pronouns match the way you look like mine do, ooh, it's so easy to get into a mental habit about it, right? It makes you think that your pronouns are quote unquote obvious. But what non-binary people show us is there's no such thing as obvious pronouns, right? And if your pronouns happen to match the way you look like mine do, then it's actually even more important for us to list our pronouns because other people don't know your pronouns by looking at you. And if your pronouns match the way you look, then you're really helping people remember not to guess. right? My listing my pronouns is just a reminder to folks not to make the assumption. Don't assume, right? Just because of this is how I look. So cisgender to me is like right-handed, a great example, because lefties are also a minority trait, like being trans, in my opinion. And guess what? We were mean to them too. Do y'all know that? We used to say that people who were left-handed were evil. We said they were possessed by a demon. The word sinister, that means evil, comes from the Latin word for left, which is sinistra, right? As recently as the 1990s in the US, there were still teachers who tied up these kids' hands in the classroom in order to force them to become right-handed instead of left-handed. So that's 30 years ago, you know? And now I don't think we could find a teacher who does that. I hope we can't find a teacher who does that, because we've learned that your dominant hand is wired to your brain in a really important way, and there's no upside to trying to change it. So instead of trying to change left-handed kiddos, we just get the left-handed scissors and put them in the classroom, and left-handed notebooks and left-handed desks. And we have left-handed golf clubs and guitars and rifles and can openers now, right? And in y'all's entire adult lives, you're never going to be asked to listen to a 1-hour presentation about why you should not be mean to left-handed people, why God does not hate left-handed people, and why it is normal to be left-handed. Because today we don't need that training. And I really believe that my trainings are going to become obsolete. There will come a time when we just know that trans people have always been with us and we're just comfortable with it, you know? But until that day comes, we got to use the word cisgender when we talk about people who are not trans. So again, gender expression is the outside. Clothing, hairstyle, jewelry, makeup, all of this outside stuff, right? And that outside may not match the inside. And this is so hard. This is actually what we use to guess about people, right? I do it too. The minute y'all come on camera, my brain starts telling me what you are, you know? The minute I start seeing people, I'm like, ooh, that one's a woman and that one's a man and that one's a woman and that one's a woman, you know? But I have learned to just tap the brakes on that, because you don't know from looking what somebody is. And this can be true for cisgender people, right? Harry Styles did a beautiful cover shoot for Vogue magazine wearing this gorgeous dress. But when he put on the dress, he was still Harry. You know, wearing a dress does not make you a woman. So anybody can dress in a way that's different from how they feel on the inside. But non-binary people, more than any other group, are the ones that show us that this is an unreliable measure for somebody's gender. And this is really, really hard. I know this is hard, y'all. What I'm talking about is very destabilizing, right? Because all of our lives, we've used that outside look to guess about the inside. And what I'm now saying is we've got to learn to disrupt that a little bit. We just can't go based on our assumptions like that anymore. Okay, so intersex folks, then, this is a little bit different. This is about people who have something different going on with their body, right? These are people who have some kind of difference in what we call the biological sex. So some intersex people are born with what's called ambiguous genitalia. And that usually means that their external genitals are sort of in between the two typical types. But many intersex people are born with completely typical genitalia. And what's different about their body may simply be something to do with their chromosomes or their gonads or their hormone production or processing. Now, I don't have any reason to think that I'm intersex, but I will tell you that there are people out there who have intersex variations and don't even know it themselves, because this is so often a very subtle thing. Most of the time when you meet an intersex person, you would not be able to tell by looking at them. And here are some actual intersex people to tell you a little bit more.
Raise your hands if you have testes. I'm Pigeon.
I'm Alice.
I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender non-conforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed, but I'm perfectly healthy and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl, and I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "No, this is horrible." I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there was nobody else like me, and so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy, you are lovable.
Your body is beautiful. You're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them.
I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there, we're out here, we're here. And I just hope you can find us.
And the prevalence on that is actually different than what was listed in that video. That video is a little bit older. And now the best reputable, educated estimates for prevalence on intersex people range from 1.7% up to 4%. So the best minds trying to think about this think that between 1.7 and 4% of humanity are born with those differences, most of which are completely benign. Most intersex people do not feel like there is something wrong with their bodies, right? This is a minority characteristic. In fact, intersex folks are always saying it's as normal and as common to be intersex as it is to have red hair, because red hair is also 1.7%, right? So it's interesting to see how human beings don't do a good job with these minority traits until we learn how to, you know. Red hair is another thing that we persecuted horribly, just like left-handedness. And both of those things are good examples of something in modern, dominant US culture that we have learned to live with in a totally different way, right? And redheaded people did not become less evil over time. Right? They were never evil. They were never evil in the first place. And it was the people who didn't have red hair who had to recognize that what we were doing was kind of nuts. You know, the people with the red hair couldn't really be the ones to change it. So intersex folks and trans folks are waiting to be seen in this same way because that's all it is. This is just a way that a small set prevalence of humans has always been born. We don't believe that the rate on this has changed over time even, right? I believe that the same prevalence of human beings has always been intersex, and the same prevalence of human beings has always been trans or non-binary. Here's an interesting graph that we use to talk a little bit more about that. This is a graph of people living like openly as left-handed from the year 1900 to the year 1976. So if you look at this, it almost looks like the number of left-handed people grew a lot, but that's not true. Left-handedness is a 12% trait. The prevalence of left-handedness is 12%. And even when we tied up their little hands, they had left-handed genes. So this is not a growing group. This is a group that was suppressed, and we slowly stopped suppressing them, right? But the number of lefties didn't actually grow or change. They just became more visible, and they were able to live their lives as an openly left-handed person instead of having had a teacher tie up their little hanny when they were little and they learned to be right-handed instead. Right? So trans folks are looking at this same kind of curve right now. It's really easy to be tempted into thinking that trans people are a growing group. I really do not believe that. I really believe that the prevalence of trans and non-binary people has always been the same, and that we're just seeing it now for the first time, just like on this graph. Okay. So what's it like to be trans? Right now, I'm sorry to say, it's still really hard. The discrimination and violence that trans and non-binary people are facing in our culture is out of control. For the last 3 years, including this year, each year has been a new high water mark for the number of anti-trans bills filed and introduced in state legislatures around the country. 2021 was the highest we'd ever seen. And then in April of 22, it became 22. And in January of this year, it became 23. And it's really important to understand that the discrimination and violence that trans people face is not evenly distributed among trans people. Our biggest national data set showed us really clearly that transgender women are having worse outcomes than transgender men, and trans folks of color are having worse outcomes than white trans folks. And I know that sounds like duh, but now we have national data that really helps us to see this, right? So transgender women of color are experiencing some of the worst discrimination and violence out there. And let me quickly show you the information that we have on high school students in New Mexico. So this is data from a survey called the New Mexico Youth Risk and Resiliency Survey. And we do this survey every other year in odd numbered years with public high school students throughout the state of New Mexico. Not every school participates, but a large number do. And we begged the YRRS to add a trans question to the survey, and they agreed to do it finally in 2017. So since 2017, we've been asking the kids if they're trans or non-binary. And in 2017, 3.4% of them said yeah. And 2.9% said, you know, something's going on with my gender, but I'm not ready for that label. In 2019, it was 3.2% who said yes, and 2.8% who were questioning. And the data for those groups is remarkably the same. If you look at it from a data point of view, the questioning kids and the trans kids look like one big group, a 6% group. In 2021, for the very first time, the positively identified trans and non-binary group ticked up to 5%. And this is just our first 3 cycles of collecting this data, y'all. But there are not more trans youth than trans adults. So this is why I believe the prevalence on trans and non-binary people is actually going to turn out to be 4 or 5%. I really do. I don't think that's outrageous. And look what the trans kids are dealing with compared to the cis kids. 9 times the unstable housing. Look at the substance misuse. It's almost unbelievable, you know? The trans kiddos had 3 times the experience of sexual violence, not in their lifetimes, just within the 12 months prior to taking the survey. And in that same 1-year period, they tried to kill themselves 4 times as often, because that is what attempted suicide means. It doesn't mean you thought about it. It means you applied lethal means to your body. 1/3 of the trans and non-binary kiddos admitted to doing that within the previous 12 months, y'all. These are our kids. These are 15, 16, 17-year-old New Mexicans. This is why we're so grateful to be invited to the call today and to get to do this training, and any other trainings that y'all want to do with us, we want to do it. The more we can learn about this, the more we can combat these statistics, right? Especially here in our own state. So what can you do to help? There's so many things, you know. We think continued training is huge. We think that signing up for the mailing list at TGRC is a big deal. There's not another transgender resource center within 10 surrounding states, y'all. So if you want to help with policy, you should just get on our mailing list. Go to our website, go down to the bottom and put your email address in. We don't send out a lot of emails, but we do try to let you know when it's time to call your legislator to help with the name change bill or whatever. So the easiest way you can help with policy and advocacy is to sign up for our mailing list. Help us train more folks. All right, let me stop sharing. Y'all have my contact info, but let me drop it in here one more time. And then I'm going to drop all of these things one last time for you. Here's my whole email signature block. Cell phone, email, lots of info about the center. Here's our resource guide. And here's that Boston Globe article that'll take you to the study, talking about names and pronouns being literal suicide prevention for people. All right, with our little bit of time we have left, do y'all have any questions for me? Anything you want to talk about or ask about or just comment about?
I do. I just have like a quick thing. For being left-handed, it's a big deal because growing up, my grandparents, they didn't like me being left-handed. So my grandpa would actually like try to discipline me about being left-handed. And turns out I actually have a cousin. We're the only 2 in our family that are left-handed. And I have a daughter and she's actually right-handed. So it kind of bummed me out because I was like, I really wanted her to be left-handed. But my cousin has a daughter, and out of her 3 kids, the youngest one is left-handed. But she's refusing, she's trying to learn with her right, because on her dad's side, they say it's a sin to be left-handed. So they're forcing her to be right-handed. And I'm like, no, let her be left-handed.
Still, y'all, there are still people who say that it is a sin to be left-handed. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's hard to even like understand, you know, like it feels like a lot of cultures have moved away from that idea, you know, but then now there still are folks who think that. So it's fascinating to me. It's such a big pattern with our stuff too. You know, we see it often judged on those same terms when really I believe I was born this way. I knew I was a boy as soon as I knew I was a human being, y'all. Oh, and I didn't tell you this. I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually reinforced that kiddos do know that young. They say that most children across the board understand the concept of gender and have a self-concept of their own gender between 3 and 5. That's just child development, they say, right? So with trans kiddos, it's actually not different that we know young like that. It's the same. It only feels different because we're saying something that's a little surprising to people, right? But that internal knowledge is not unusual to know that as young as I did. It's actually typical to know it as young as that. Yes, Jen.
Do you have resources, like maybe it comes up in your longer training, that give individuals the ability to honor their own personal beliefs? Like, I might have strong spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, but I also want to be capable of having conversations that honor the person I'm trying to help or provide services to. So really diving into those sort of active listening and motivational interviewing, like those techniques and skills to talk to people, even if it's not comfortable for you. Is that something in the toolkit that you have?
Not so much. We usually, I think, are expecting employers to be building those skills with folks, and setting the institutional organizational boundaries about what's okay, I mean, we know that people have all different kinds of beliefs, but trans people actually report on the national survey, trans folks report postponing or completely avoiding medical care, even when sick or injured, because of the way they've been treated, or have know people who've been treated in clinical institutions, So it, like, yes, how do we respect each other's beliefs, but how does every single person know that they can get health care when they need it? I mean, you're absolutely right. I think it's about communication techniques and stuff like that, but we just expecting different organizations to set the tone about what's okay and what's not okay. And for us, we know that this actually translates, like sometimes that that disparaging treatment, or that inability, that intentionally misgendering people or not acknowledging them because it goes against your personal or cultural beliefs it costs people in terms of access and safety. So it becomes it becomes an issue of weighing out safety over comfort, right? That comfort is one thing, but a person's actual safety and ability to access care or services, it has to weigh out heavier than another person's comfort or discomfort, And we think about that in terms of all kinds of minority traits that people might carry. Some people aren't going to be comfortable working or like, let's say in a domestic violence shelter, some people might not want to have a roommate who is Muslim, for instance, right? But the domestic violence shelter is probably not going to say, okay, well, let's get you a different roommate. They're going to say, sorry, this is what we do. We don't discriminate against people. And so we fully expect you to find a way to make it work or whatever, find some way to work it out for folks. We're not going to put the Muslim person out just because someone's uncomfortable with them, right? We have to find a way to move past some of that discomfort. And what we're really talking about is access and safety, really, As an educator, I fully respect that people have all different beliefs in my trainings. I know there are people who are going to leave, still feeling badly about this topic. But in general, what we're hoping is to help people see this the way we more often see left-handedness, that we're moving to a place of greater comfort by acknowledging and understanding that this is just a way that some people have always been. There have always been trans and non-binary people who've always existed, right? Now we're just starting to acknowledge and integrate that information. This isn't new. It's not new. It's just new to us, right? Go ahead, Benjamin.
Thank you, Adrian. I was curious if what your experience and perspective has been with the resources for transgender and LGBTQ community members, also understanding that I know you can't speak for everyone in that community, with the 988 crisis line and SAMHSA crisis line. We've been trying to really compile effective resources for community members with 988. And for me, those resources seem to be really lacking. So I was curious what your experience and other members with TGRC has been with those resources, and if you could help direct us to some more effective resources, if you find those lacking as well.
It's so hard, I mean, I think that people who do the kind of work y'all do in this room know that there's not enough resources for cis people. It's like, there's not enough behavioral health. There's not enough recovery treatment, inpatient and outpatient substance misuse treatment. There's not enough inpatient adolescent treatment, period. It's like there's just not enough of anything that people need. So for trans and non-binary and even LGBT people, we feel that squeeze of there just not being enough, period. But in New Mexico, we're better off than a lot of surrounding states. And we have that providers directory that can be really helpful. And I'm really happy to help you individually with that too. If you want to email me, I'm happy to take a look at what you have and see if there's anything I know about that's not in there already. So very, very happy to help with that effort, if we can. And I think, we at least have TGRC, we have programs for youth, we have some mental health stuff. We know that Healthcare for the Homeless does a great job with LGBT people. We know that there are some resources out there that are high value, even though there still isn't enough. And so far, we're waiting and seeing on 988, but we've trained all the new cohort of people that have come to work at ACS. So at least we're getting in there and doing this training and raising awareness about this population with those folks that are working in the community safety department. And so that's, we always take that for what it is, which is a good sign. If they're committed to doing training and making sure every employee gets trained, that often does raise the baseline in a place for how folks get dealt with. So I appreciate what you're saying. I don't think there is enough, but I do think there there's some, and I'd love to help you look at your list and see if there's anything I could add to it at all.
Thank you.
All right, y'all are awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. If you want to talk to me after today, please don't hesitate to hit me up. You have my cell phone and my email in the chat. If you need help or have a question or want to get me to train somebody, I want you to get in touch with me. Please, please, please. Thank y'all so much. Thank you for having me here. Have a great rest of your week. Thanks a lot. I see y'all in the chat. Thank you.
Raise your hands if you have testes. I'm Pigeon.
I'm Alice.
I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender nonconforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed, but I'm perfectly healthy and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl, and I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "No, this is horrible." I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there was nobody else like me, and so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy, you are lovable.
Your body is beautiful. You're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them.
I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there, we're out here, we're here. And I just hope you can find us.
And the prevalence on that is actually